concerns in Allegheny County with helpful hints and resources. However, this webinar is not intended to serve as official guidance or instructions. During the presentation, next slide please, we will be automatically muting all of the microphones during the presentation for those who are not presenting until the end of the presentation. This webinar includes several opportunities to share your input and interact using the chat tool, but we will not be sharing your name to protect your privacy when we share any of the comments or questions that you might put in the chat. To use the chat function, you can find the icon at the bottom of your screen that looks like a cartoon bubble. We circled it here in red in this screenshot on the slide. And as I mentioned, we'll be recording the webinar, so it can be viewed later, but we will stop the recording during the presentation and answer any questions during the discussion section at the end of the presentation. Next slide. This webinar is part of a 5-part flood education series that was created as an interagency collaboration with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Pennsylvania Silver Jackets, along with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority, the Allegheny County Conservation District, the Three Rivers Wet Weather Organization, and the Watersheds of South Pittsburgh Organization. I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce you to the other 2 speakers that we have today. So Rebecca, if you could introduce yourself, followed by Elaine.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rebecca Zazis. I'm a watershed educator at the Allegheny County Conservation District.
Hello, my name is Elaine Henricks. I'm the Education and Outreach Associate at the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority.
Great, thank you both. And we also have Annie with us today, who will be monitoring the chat for any questions. So Annie, if you could introduce yourself as well, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Annie Quinn, and I am the program manager at Three Rivers Wet Weather.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Next slide, please. So now that we know each other a bit better, I'd like to just talk about what we're going to be going over. We're going to be talking about some watershed and flooding basics and specifically discussing what is a watershed and how it functions, how water management, such as changes to the land and rivers and stormwater and sewer systems, can affect the watershed. And we'll also be talking about what the different types of flooding are and why flooding may be occurring where you live. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and Annie will either answer those questions herself, ask the presenter to answer the question who it refers to, or she will also just make sure to hold those questions to the end if it seems more appropriate to do so. Next slide. So first of all, I wanted to show you a simple diagram of the water cycle. You may have seen something similar in a science class or a textbook. And as you can see in this diagram, it shows the water cycle functions as a system where water falls from the sky in the form of rain or snow. It's absorbed by the soil as groundwater, or it's sucked up by the trees and other vegetation. And it collects as surface water in streams and rivers, which eventually outlet to larger bodies of water, such as lakes and oceans. The water is then transferred from the land and the water bodies back to the atmosphere by evaporation and transpiration from plants. Transpiration in plants is kind of like sweating. The plants release water through their leaves and to help them cool down, just like we do. So all of these processes continue as a cycle and serve as a mechanism that nature uses to move water from the Earth's surface to the atmosphere and vice versa. Next slide. So now that we have that simple cycle in mind, take a look at this next graphic, which takes that simplified water cycle and shows how the human environment can alter that simple cycle. We still have our rain and snow falling to the ground, but instead of just being absorbed as groundwater or collecting the surface water, we can also see how we have a lot of surfaces where runoff from places like parking lots, streets, or other impervious areas where water cannot be absorbed. We also have groundwater wells that suck up the groundwater for human use. And as we also have the sewer and surface water management systems that Elaine will talk us through later. So all of this extra water and the sewer and stormwater systems that convey that surface water for human use instead of it being moved through the natural bodies of water and water systems is changing the water cycle. Next slide. Along with the water cycle, you may have also heard the term watershed. But what is a watershed exactly? Rebecca from the Allegheny County Conservation District is here to help us understand.
Thank you, Mary. So, a watershed is an area of land defined by hills and ridges that drains water to a common point. Think of a watershed as a funnel. All of the liquid that collects in a funnel drains at the same point. In other words, water runs downhill, and the physical features like hills and ridges guide water's path. The watershed includes everything within its boundary, the land and the streams. You are always in a watershed. There is no place on earth that water isn't moving and collecting water to a lower point. Watersheds are also nested. They can be as small as a footprint or as large as the ocean. Next slide. So, watersheds are connected and nested. Actions that take place in one part of the watershed can impact other parts of the same watershed or other watersheds downstream. You may have noticed that mostly little creeks run in steeper areas, and those little creeks drain into other larger creeks, and those larger creeks flow into large rivers. Little streams coming together to create larger bodies of water. Here in this graphic, you probably recognize the location of Pittsburgh because of where the three rivers come together. Did you know that all of Allegheny County eventually drains to the Ohio River? The Ohio River then drains to the Mississippi River, and the Mississippi River drains to the Gulf of Mexico. So, a portion of the rain that falls in Allegheny County can actually make its way all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, because water is always seeking to move from higher points to lower points. Pittsburgh is around 1,300 feet above sea level, and the Gulf of Mexico is at 0 feet above sea level, high elevation to low elevation. Another example, let's say I'm at North Park and I drop a rubber ducky into Pine Creek. That rubber ducky will travel down Pine Creek to the Allegheny River, from the Allegheny River to the Ohio River to the Mississippi, and again to the Gulf. Because watersheds are nested, as I talk tonight from Allegheny County, I am simultaneously in the Allegheny River watershed, the Ohio River watershed, the Mississippi River watershed, and the Gulf watershed. Next slide. Now that we have had a brief background on watersheds, we're going to do a group activity to allow everyone to find out which watershed you live in. If you prefer to follow along instead of trying it out for yourself, feel free to do that. You can always try these tools at a later time. We will provide the links. For those that would like to test the watershed mapping tool out, we ask that everyone open a new tab in their internet browser and type in the website you see here on the slide, in which Annie has placed in the chat box. Once you are there, you will find the button on the bottom that says Get Started. Select this button, which will take you to a new screen. So you can find that, or you can follow along. So, on the Select Area page, you will click the drop-down area under Delineate Watershed and choose the Continental US Medium Resolution option. While you're there, in the Smaller Layers box, turn on your Continental Stream Network there as well. Suddenly, the streams in your specific watershed will be highlighted. You can use the plus and minus icons to navigate to where you live or any other place of interest to you. Once you have navigated to where you would like to be, use the pointer to select your area. Next slide. The website will automatically outline the watershed for the area you selected. You can see on the map that the watershed looks just like our definition. Higher areas with little creeks flow to lower areas with larger rivers. If you are looking at my screen, you will see some important stream definitions that help us understand flooding moving forward. The purple circle is the headwaters of this creek. Headwaters are sometimes creeks that only flow after a rainstorm or come out on the ground as springs. They are very small little creeks. We call those first order streams. Headwaters can also be where two larger bodies of water meet, like the Allegheny River and the Monongahela River coming together to form the Ohio River. We use numbers to help scientists understand the size of the stream as it moves through its own watershed. You can see those different stream sizes in the information box on the left of your screen. The green arrow shows the main stem of the creek. This is where the tributaries, which are different smaller creeks with different headwaters, flow into our main stream system and join it. The blue circle is the outfall. This is where our delineated creek flows into the larger river system, in this case, the Ohio River. River flow is in the direction of the blue arrow. Even the Ohio has to follow the same stream rules we have outlined in this presentation. The Ohio River flows downhill from Pittsburgh. This application has many fun features that you can click around in and learn more. If you look at the orange circles on my screen, there are things you can click on that will give you information about your watershed, like land use, soil makeup, the topography, which is the terrain, climate, and farmland makeup. Next slide. Speaking of flooding, let's talk about land use. Look at this cool feature within our watershed. When I use the small central box in the application and turn on the natural land cover database feature, the map will change. The areas with heavy red color are areas with lots of people. That also means lots of driveways, roofs, roads, and other development. See how developed the city of Pittsburgh is in the background? We have a lot of development within those watersheds. Focusing out on the watershed we used in our example here, we see different patches of development in different areas. These areas, because of their land use, will change the water flow within those headwater streams. Think about these things. What does the land use look like in the watershed you chose? How might that land use affect the streams themselves? We're now going to move away from our exercise and dig into the importance of land use as we talk about water. So if you are exploring the Map My Watershed tool independently, please come back to the main presentation. Next slide. Streams and creeks are part of the watershed and act as the transportation highways to move water and sediment through the watershed. In their natural state, meaning not changed or altered by human activity, they are able to handle impacts from flooding or large storms by spreading out the water flow. If a stream floods, it can sprawl out and onto the floodplain and slow and soak into the ground and return to the original stream channel once those high flows have run their course after raining or snow melt. Natural, unchanged stream channels are rarely straight except for very short distances. Even natural streams and rivers that are fairly straight have small curves within them. This drawing in the middle of the slide shows what a natural channel might look like, with several twists and turns. Imagine the difference between driving on a windy road versus the turnpike or highway. The straightness of the turnpike lets you drive your car much faster than on a windy road, where you have to slow down on bends or you would run off the road. This is the same idea for streams. The natural bends and curves slow down flow. Next slide. An important part of a healthy watershed, streams and rivers, are riparian buffers and floodplains. A riparian buffer is the area of some combination of trees, shrubs, and grasses that runs alongside a stream or river, which helps slow and clean stormwater and keep stream banks in place instead of washing away. And a floodplain is a generally flat area of land next to a river or stream. It stretches from the banks of the river to the outer edges of the valley. A floodplain is called a floodplain because that's what it does. It floods. A floodplain consists of two parts. The first part is the main channel of the river itself, called the floodway. Floodways can sometimes be seasonal, meaning the main channel or part of the channel is dry for some of the year. Beyond the floodway is the flood fringe. The flood fringe extends from the outer banks of the floodway to the valley walls of a river valley, which mark the area where the valley floor begins to rise into hill slopes. As we can see in these images, and in the cartoon on the previous slide, the bends and turns in the river or stream are what create the riparian buffer and floodplain for a healthy river or stream. Change is made of the river or stream, as is often done in urban and suburban areas, removes the riparian buffer and floodplain, which also removes all of those natural barriers that help protect the channel from flooding and extreme erosion from stormwater. Removing the bends in the stream also makes the water move much faster, which causes even more erosion and excess sediment. Next slide. These are some photos of streams using their floodplains and riparian buffers. Streams transport water and sediment, have bends and floodplains, and are forested here in PA. Because streams transport material and water, they will always readjust to carry the load, and floodplains are essential for that needed elbow room, while riparian buffers help to provide stability to stream banks. Streams are always changing. Next slide. As I'm sure many of you have seen, Streams and rivers in Allegheny County have been modified. What do we mean exactly when we say modifications to the stream? Based on what you've learned so far about undisturbed streams and rivers, we're going to give people the chance to pick out those differences in these two streams. Please take a moment to add your observations in the chat. What are the differences between the stream on the right and the stream on the left, which are both located in Allegheny County?
Rebecca, I don't see anyone dropping in the chat any answers yet. So just to remind everyone that if you want to chat and drop in some answers, I'd love to let everyone know what you saw and think about these two streams.
Okay, so list the differences between the two streams. You could say here, yeah, okay, got a contribution.
Yeah, so someone says that they are already seeing some of the things you talked about. There's one has curves and one is straight. The next commenter said there's no riparian buffer. I'm assuming the one on the right is the one that they say is missing that buffer.
Excellent.
And it looks as though one of the streams is much more natural and the other one is a man-made stream. And the one on the left is clearly a more residential area, whereas the one on the right is probably a very urban area. And it looks as though civilization is in the floodplain on the right. So you're getting a lot of people over there on the right shot. And it's also, the one on the right is very channelized. And we have additional people saying it's really obvious how the channelization is looking between the two.
Right. Thank you so much for your contributions to the chat box. Right, vertical banks, no riparian buffer, lack of rocks, there's no floodplain, there's no bends or curves to slow it down, no vegetation to soak it up. So the modified stream on the right does not have the same ability to slow floodwater and stormwater. So what does that mean for our continually changing land use? Next slide, please. So we've changed or removed many of our stream's natural tools for dealing with flooding, stormwater, and erosion. Now we are continuing to add to the responsibilities of these streams by building up our landscapes which shed more stormwater, like roads, parking lots, buildings, and sidewalks. All of the things that do not absorb water, like natural landscapes, but shed water. In this diagram, you can see the loss of sponge power and evaporation by swapping from green landscapes to gray landscapes. Next slide, please. Let's look at the water management power of impervious cover, like parking lots, buildings, and roads versus an area of trees. Trees and vegetation absorb, slow, and evaporate runoff. This example is showing the difference in runoff for 10,000 square feet of area, 639 cubic feet of runoff versus 3.98 cubic feet of runoff in the area with trees. That's a difference of around 635 cubic feet of runoff absorbed between forest and hard surfaces. There is no contest between these two landscapes for their ability to slow and absorb water. Next slide, please. I'm going to show you a couple changed landscapes to think about now that we've described how a natural undisturbed system works and the power of green to gray. I mentioned the importance of riparian buffers a few slides back, which is the strip of trees, shrubs, and grasses that run alongside a waterway that help to slow, clean, and absorb runoff and floodwater, as well as to keep stream banks and soil in place. Based on those qualities buffers provide, think about what's going on in these two photos. There are spaces for floodwaters in both of these streams, but what about the trees and shrubs that could help to slow down and absorb stormwater and also slow floodwater from within the stream itself? Something that really surprised me when I first learned it in my current job is that mowed grass is actually more similar to impervious surfaces like concrete and asphalt in its ability to help with runoff and floodwaters. Because water is not being slowed and captured here, it continues its journey downstream, picking up even more stormwater runoff. Imagine a stream after a heavy storm and all of that rushing water blasting through over grass versus a stand of trees. To help manage stormwater and floodwater, a stream system really needs trees, shrubs, and even meadow grasses to help slow and store. Next slide. Think of rain falling in each of these photos, which is a before and after landscape. Before the neighborhood was built, rain would fall into this green space and be absorbed. Now, when rain falls in the area, it runs off all those hard surfaces you see, the roof, sidewalks, street, driveways, and does not have many places to go or be absorbed. Much of the water that falls in this area will end up running into storm drains, into the street, and into the sewer system and streams. And in Allegheny County, these modified streams are often overwhelmed by the amount of stormwater coming in, which leads us to the next part of this presentation, led by Elaine with the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority.
Thanks, Rebecca. Similar to a watershed, a sewer shed is an area of land where stormwater and/or sewage flows into and through sewers to a single endpoint. Starting in the mid-1800s, underground sewers were built in the Pittsburgh region to carry sewage and stormwater away from homes and businesses quickly to reduce public health hazards. It was common at the time to discharge sewage and stormwater into rivers using one large pipe called a combined sewer, since stormwater helped flush the sewage solids away. To make way for development, some historic streams were also routed underground into the combined sewers. When the Allegheny County Sanitary Authority, also known as AlphaSan, built their wastewater treatment plant in 1959, the combined sewers were redirected to the plant, but overflow outfalls remained along the Allegheny, Monongahela, and Ohio rivers and along some local streams because the plant and the pipes lacked capacity for large storms. Around that time, modern separated sewer systems began to be built, which direct sewage to the wastewater treatment plant and stormwater directly to streams and rivers. Depending on where rain falls in the Pittsburgh region today, it may enter a combined sewer system or a separated sewer system. In a combined sewer system during dry weather, the sewage from buildings flows into the underground combined sewer pipe. The sewage is piped to the wastewater treatment plant to be cleaned, then discharged into the river. When it rains, the storm drains direct the stormwater into the sewer pipes that are already carrying sewage. The stormwater can overwhelm the capacity of those combined sewer pipes. This can cause raw sewage and stormwater to overflow into rivers and streams at the sewer outfall. These combined sewer overflows, also known as CSOs, make it dangerous to come in contact with river and stream water during overflow events. In the city of Pittsburgh, approximately 75% of the sewer sheds are combined sewer systems, and it only takes a tenth of an inch of rain falling over the city to cause combined sewer overflows. In a separated sewer system during dry weather, the sewage from buildings flows into the underground sanitary sewer pipes. The sewage is piped to the wastewater treatment plant to be cleaned, then discharged into the rivers. When it rains, the stormwater flows into the storm drains in the street and is directed into underground storm sewer pipes. These pipes carry the stormwater directly to streams and rivers. The sewage continues to be carried to the wastewater treatment plant to be cleaned, then discharged to the river. Approximately 25% of sewer sheds within the city of Pittsburgh are separated sewer systems. Other municipalities in Allegheny County that were developed more recently than Pittsburgh tend to have more areas served by separated sewer systems. Depending on where you live in Allegheny County, you may be able to look up your sewer shed on the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority's interactive Find Your Sewer Shed map. If you want to try it out online during this quick video, go to pgh2o.com/find-your-sewer-shed and scroll to the map at the bottom of the page. Enter your address or zoom to your location on the map. If your address isn't on the map, you can use Pittsburgh Liberty School at 601 Silver Street, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 15232, like I am here in this example. Click on the blue or green background at your address to select your sewer shed, then zoom out to view your sewer shed's shape. The pop-up information box shows you the name of your sewer shed and its type. If your address is in a combined sewer shed, additional facts about the sewer shed, like the typical number of combined sewer overflow events a year, may be available. This example is in the A22 sewer shed, which is a combined sewer shed that leads to the 22nd outfall on the Allegheny River as counted from the point downtown. If you want, you can type into the chat what kind of sewer system is in your sewer shed. Does your sewer shed information box have a C for combined or an S for separated? Next, we're going to walk through an interactive tool called Watershed that can show you the path your sewage takes through the sewers on its way to the wastewater treatment plant. Three Rivers Wet Weather and Civic Mapper created this tool in partnership with Alcatan for the plant service area in Allegheny County. If you want to try it out online, go to flush-it.civicmapper.com. Again, enter your address on the map. If your address isn't on the map, you can use Pittsburgh Liberty School at 601 Filbert Street, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania 15232. It can take a few minutes for the tool to process the flush using the sewer data. Once it finishes processing, it will bring up statistics about how far your flush travels in the sewer system, how many hours it takes to reach the wastewater treatment plant, and the communities that the sewer pipes pass through. For this example, a flush at Pittsburgh Liberty School travels 11.48 miles through the sewers to reach Alcatan. If you want, type into the chat how many miles your flush travels through the sewer network to reach the Alcatan wastewater treatment plant. To finish, close the information window to see your flush's path on the map. If you were following along during these video activities, which did go by pretty quickly, make sure to switch back into the Zoom meeting presentation as we continue. Think back to your sewer shed. All the sewage and/or stormwater in your sewer shed eventually leads to one pipe. Each flush travels through the sewer pipes under the street, which flow into larger branch pipes, then huge tunnel sewers along the river as the sewage gets closer to the wastewater treatment plant. When too much stormwater runs off the land in a sewer shed, it funnels into the sewers, overwhelming the capacity of the pipes downstream. Now that we've learned about watersheds and sewer sheds, we're going to look at the different types of flooding that could impact you or your property. Since we just talked about sewers, I'll start off by discussing sewage backups. When sewer pipes are blocked or broken, sewage can back up in the pipes and surface through manholes and storm drains in the street, or through low points in household plumbing like basement drains, toilets, and showers. Lack of capacity in combined sewers during rainstorms or snowmelt can also cause sewage mixed with stormwater to back up into streets or household plumbing. The lack of capacity can be in the public combined sewer mains or in private combined sewer laterals. Blockages and cracks in pipes that disrupt the flow of sewage can be caused by tree roots, as the photo shows on the right, grease, hair, wipes, concrete, and other materials that should be kept out of plumbing. Sewage contains bacteria, viruses, and other pathogens that can be harmful to your health and can contaminate the area in which the backup occurred. Accidental ingestion or contact with raw sewage can cause gastrointestinal illness, skin infections, or rashes, so it is important to stay away from the contaminated area until professionals can come to assess the damage. We will talk more about how to respond to sewage backups in later workshops. When thinking about sewage backup flooding, it is important to know that a sewer lateral runs from your household's internal plumbing to the public sewer main under the street. Depending on where you live, the responsibility for maintaining that sewer lateral may differ. In the city of Pittsburgh, residential and commercial property owners are responsible for the entire sewer lateral. The Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority maintains the public sewer main and the small portion of the joint called a Y, which is shown in the diagram on the right. If a standard Y was not utilized and a property owner actually broke into the main using a hammer tap, then the property owner is responsible for their lateral all the way to the main. In some other municipalities, the Public Sewer Authority or municipality itself is responsible for the public sewer main, Y joint, and a section of the sewer lateral to the edge of right-of-way, easement, or property line. Right-of-ways include streets, curbs, and sidewalks typically. The property owner would then only be responsible for the section of the sewer lateral from their building to the right-of-way or property line. Also important to note is that in combined sewer areas, some properties' roof gutters tie into their sewer lateral internally in their basement or outside in outlet drains. That means that the property's sewer lateral is taking in stormwater in addition to sewage when it rains. In the city of Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority is responsible for breaks or clogs in a public sewer main. The property owner is responsible for breaks or clogs in their sewer lateral and for cleanup if the sewage backup occurred during a period of heavy rain that then drains once the storm ends. There may differ. Now that we have talked about sewage backups, Mary is going to talk about other types of flooding.
Thanks, Elaine. So, like Rebecca showed us on the previous slides on floodplains, we know that floods are a natural process for streams and rivers in a continually changing environment, and streams receive most of their water input from precipitation, and the amount of precipitation varies throughout the year and from year to year. But overall, as we saw at the beginning of the presentation, the water cycle is meant to be a balanced system. Water flowing into one part of the cycle, like a stream, is balanced by water flowing back to the ocean or being absorbed by the land and vegetation or being evaporated. But sometimes the amount of water flowing into one area is greater than the capacity of the stream or system to hold it, and the result is a flood. So combinations of factors along with a lot of precipitation can also lead to flooding in streams and rivers. So for example, heavy snow melts, water saturated ground, drainage modifications to natural streams like Rebecca was showing us, and increases of stormwater from impervious surfaces all can contribute to flooding in streams and rivers. So as you can guess, it's a bit more complicated than it looks. The different types of flooding are often related. So for riverine flooding, or flooding in rivers and streams, flooding occurs when water levels are over the top of the channel's banks due to more precipitation than it can handle, like we see in these photos. However, stormwater runoff can also contribute to riverine flooding in areas where the stormwater drains to the rivers and streams, which is a lot of places, including Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, like Elaine showed us. Next slide. In addition to riverine flooding, surface flooding, which is also known as overland flooding, pluvial flooding, or inland flooding, occurs when an extreme rainfall event creates a flood independent of an overflowing water body, meaning flooding that occurs not from a stream or a river leaving its banks, like I showed in the previous slide, but rather surface flooding occurs when a stormwater system is overwhelmed, either because the system is clogged or there's just too much water flowing for the system to capture. So when this happens, water flows into streets and nearby structures. You can see how streets like the one that I'm showing in this picture on the left in a Pittsburgh neighborhood, they can act almost like stream channels that could consolidate and convey water that enter the main street from side streets. And if you add in overburdened stormwater systems and runoff from other impervious surfaces, then you have a lot of water that has nowhere to go. So surface flooding can be very dangerous, especially when people try to drive or walk through the floodwaters. As the graphic on the right shows, just 6 inches of moving water can knock someone off of their feet who's walking through floodwaters, and just 1 foot of floodwaters on the street can carry a car away. Also, floodwaters are not typically very clean, and they can carry raw sewage, toxic substances, or other contaminants that can be harmful to someone trying to walk or wade through the water. So a good rule of thumb is just to avoid walking or driving through flooded streets and never drive around a flood barricade. You can find out more information on flood safety and preparedness in the next 4 webinars in the series, so make sure you don't miss those. Next slide. So as you can guess, flooding caused by stormwater system backup and sewage backup flooding, like Elaine showed us, goes hand in hand with surface flooding and riverine flooding, like I was showing you. When we remove the vegetation that acts like a sponge in the watershed and replace it with impervious surfaces like roofs, driveways, and paved roads, we create an abundance of stormwater runoff, which can easily overwhelm the stormwater system. And when the stormwater systems are overwhelmed, the surface water has nowhere to go except into streets, structures, and adjacent water bodies. Next slide. These photos show us how easily surface flooding due to stormwater system overload can occur. When the storm systems are overwhelmed, usually part of the problem is debris and trash clogging the water inlet. Litter and trash and leaves aren't just unsightly, they can lead to serious localized flooding in our neighborhoods and on our streets because the debris clogs up the stormwater system and it doesn't let the water in, so the system can't do its job during a heavy storm. Next slide. Another interesting cause of surface flooding, I'm a geologist, so I find this stuff kind of cool, is flooding that may be happening from paleo streams, or areas where surface water used to flow that have been filled in and covered up by roads, parking lots, and other development. So the shaded relief map shown on the right was created by the University of Pittsburgh, and it shows the locations of streams that used to flow throughout the city. And as you can see, some of those look to be pretty large. But the majority of the streams and tributaries that are shown on this relief map have now been filled in. But the water will still collect and flow in the same general areas, and this can also contribute to flooding. Next slide. To switch gears a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about infrastructure failure flooding, or flooding that occurs when a dam or a levee fails. The example that you can see in these old photographs are from the historic Johnstown flood of 1889. In the Johnstown, PA area, the Little Conemaugh and the Stony Creek rivers form the Conemaugh River. And in 1889, the South Fork Dam held back the Conemaugh River at Lake Conemaugh. And at least once a year, one or both of the rivers overflowed into the streets of Johnstown when a heavy rain fell over the area, or when the heavy snow melted too quickly in the spring. And in the late afternoon of May 31st, 1889, people were gathered in the upper stories of their home, waiting out the worst of the flooding, just as they had done many times before. Meanwhile, officials at the South Fork Dam feared the dam would fail due to a lot of precipitation and runoff that was collecting rapidly behind the dam. As we know, the dam did fail, and engineers at the time estimated a body of water moving into the valley with a force of Niagara Falls, and unfortunately killing more than 2,200 people. This is the worst dam disaster in America's history. But we've come a long way since that tragic day in Johnstown in 1889. Now, every May 31st, in honor of the community of Johnstown, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, where I work, observes National Dam Safety Awareness Day. And this encourages and promotes individual and community awareness and responsibility and the best practices for dam safety. An additional goal is to raise awareness of the benefits of dams and what they can offer communities. For Allegheny County and surrounding areas, we are included in the Army Corps of Engineers Pittsburgh District. This district is known as the Headwaters District because, as Rebecca showed us in the Watershed tool, the point in downtown Pittsburgh is actually the headwaters of the Ohio River, where the Mon and the Allegheny come together, is actually the headwaters of the Ohio River. So the Pittsburgh district comprises the Ohio River drainage basin and covers an area of approximately 26,000 square miles, including portions of Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, New York, and Maryland. And the major river systems within the Pittsburgh district include the Upper Ohio, the Allegheny, the Monongahela, and the Beaver Rivers. The district manages 16 flood control and multipurpose reservoirs and 23 navigational locks and dams, but the locks and dams are not flood risk reduction dams. So today, upstream of Johnstown is the Conemaugh Dam. And the Conemaugh Dam is one of the U.S. Army Corps' flood control dams in the Pittsburgh district. And since its completion in 1952, the Conemaugh has prevented more than $2.2 billion in flood damage. And the Conemaugh Dam is even able to reduce flood levels at the point in Pittsburgh by 4 feet. So another dam that you might have heard of that has a big impact in our region is the Kinzua Dam. That's the photo on the bottom right. And this provides complete flood protection for the town of Warren, Pennsylvania, and in conjunction with other projects like the Conemaugh Dam in the upper left there, that can substantially reduce the flooding risk in the Allegheny and Upper Ohio River valleys, including the city of Pittsburgh. So what are the actual risks of dam failure today in Allegheny County? Well, for the types of flood control dams, like I showed in these examples, the risk is equal to about 1 in a million chance of failure. More specifically, it's between 1 in 500,000 and 1 in 5 million. So hopefully that number can put your mind at ease and also offer some perspective of how far we have come since that tragic day in Johnstown. Next slide. So a bit of a review of all the things that we've talked about today. If you were to think about a recipe for flooding, the things that we discussed include going from that green to gray, like Rebecca described, which is what happens when we remove vegetation and replace it with impervious surfaces. And then if we increase the precipitation, like has been happening in the last 50 years in this area, and more stormwater due to more impervious surfaces, and combine that with changes to our streams by burying them, altering them, replacing them with stormwater or sewer systems, and you add all those factors together, you can see how our flood risk can easily become increased and influenced by multiple factors. So what can you do about all of this? Maybe it feels really overwhelming. Well, educating yourself like you are doing right now is a really powerful action that you can take to help mitigate flooding. Next slide. We went over a few questions today, and we hope we did a good job of answering what a watershed is, how water management can affect the watershed, and also the different types of flooding that you may see or have seen in Allegheny County. Next slide. But this presentation might have also brought up other questions for you, such as what tools are out there that are available to find out where flooding is occurring and where that flooding occurs typically, or what you can do to prepare, respond, and recover from a flood event if that does happen in your community. And if you're looking for answers to some of these questions, we encourage you to attend the other webinars in this series to hopefully answer some of those. The more people that are willing to help fix the flooding problems in our community here in Allegheny County, the better. It's definitely a shared problem and also a shared responsibility. So thank you again for taking time to learn more about these topics. And at this time, we're going to stop the recording. So if anyone has any questions about the information we presented today, we welcome you to either type those questions in the chat or just come off mute to ask us anything that's on your mind.